am Tuesday Sigmund. I'm the Director of Counseling and Disability Services. Today we're going to talk a little bit about personality, the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, and how it relates to careers. If you will notice in your chat box, there is going to be a link that is sent to the survey for today, and also there's going to be a link that Sarah will post in the chat box here shortly that will count your attendance. Please make sure to fill out the attendance so we can get that information to your instructors. And also, when we're done, please fill out the survey. I'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so today's agenda, we're going to talk about the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, personality, and careers. Learning about the underlying theory of the Myers-Briggs assessment and the meaning of preferences. We're actually going to do a quick down and dirty self-assessment. This is not a valid assessment. It's just a little taste of what the Myers-Briggs is and about the preferences. And then we're going to talk a little bit about Type Focus in careers. Type Focus is a program that we have in our counseling center, and you can access it through your MyCCCNTI account. It explains the Myers-Briggs, and it goes into some other assessments that help lead to job search and then job satisfaction. So let me introduce the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator to you all. So I want to start with personality and behavior. So we all know that behavior are the observable acts that we can see other people do and see in ourselves. They're really just the things that we do, and they're a result of a mix of factors. Our personality is different. So it's the innate way that we think, feel, and act on most occasions. I tell folks that this is kind of our default. Everybody has a default, and depending on the situation, we step back into that way of thinking, feeling, and acting in those sorts of occasions. Those are really inborn characteristics that are enduring, meaning that they last our lifetime, and they're the core of who we are. And that's the foundation of the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. Carl Jung, if you've ever taken a Psychology 150 class, you've probably learned a little bit about Carl Jung and his theory of personality type. He really developed the theory, and he observed that everyone uses two kinds of mental processes: taking in and gathering information, and then making decisions and coming to conclusions with that information. And we all have a preferred way of using those mental processes. He also observed that we live in two worlds. We have this outer world of people, things, and activities, and then we have an inner world of our own ideas, thoughts, and observations. And everyone is typically energized by either the outer world or the inner world. You may have heard this as extroverted or introverted before, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute. But those are our preferences. We have a preferred way of doing something. He also stated that those preferences are just innate, and we're born to for a liking of doing things a certain way. And he also recognized that preferences are shaped by our environment, like our family, our culture, our education, and our work. So that's where we talk about nature versus nurture. So nature is really the foundation of the MBTI framework, and then our nurture is how the environment impacts that. So people will say, well, if it's innate, you know, I feel like I've changed. Well, that may be true, but typically that's because of environmental influences or things that have happened in your life. So we'll take just a short minute and illustrate the meaning of preferences. So we all have a dominant hand, which we use to write. And what I encourage people to do is, you know, write down your name. So if you want to take just a second, get out a piece of paper, you're going to need that piece of paper here in just a minute anyway, to write your name, and just do your first name as you normally would with your dominant hand. And then what I'd like for you to do is to write your name with your non-dominant hand, the hand that you usually wouldn't use. So typically, people will say to me, oh, well, it's really easy. I didn't even have to think about it when I was using my dominant hand. And then when you used your non-dominant hand, it was a little bit more difficult. People will say things like, oh, it was awkward. I didn't like the way it felt. I didn't like what I got down on the paper. I wouldn't want anyone to see that. And so we know that people have a preference of using either their right or their left hand. What we also know is that the environment can influence someone's preference by using one hand or the other. So I always give the example of my son, and I was, in the living room, and I heard my husband working with him on his ABCs in the kitchen one day, and he said to him, "No, no, 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 use your other hand." And what my son was doing was using his left hand. But we've been preconditioned to that the right hand is more favorable in our society. And without even thinking about it, he had ingrained some of that environment in, so that nurture, so that changed the way that my son was writing. And he does write with his right hand now. And I just always wonder if that had not been incorporated, would he be a lefty? So the MBTI really builds and expands on Jung's theory. It describes 4 pairs of opposite preferences, like our right and our left hand. We use all of them. So just like our left and our right hand, we use both of them for different tasks. And this is the same way with the preferences of the MYERS-BRIGGS type indicator. We use them all, but we like one more than the other. The assessment is designed to indicate our inborn preferences, but it's not in any way designed to measure our skills or the effects of the environment. So talk about a little bit of the preference pairs, and then we're going to do a quick down and dirty MYERS-Briggs self-assessment. So the 4 pairs are opposites. They're all opposites. So when you think about extroversion versus introversion, they're opposite ways to direct and receive energy. Sensing and intuition are opposite ways to take in information. Thinking or feeling are opposite ways to decide and come to conclusions. And then last but not least, judging or perceiving are opposite ways to approach the outside world. So the assessment has you decide, which are your preferences. So we're going to go through these really quickly. The program that I mentioned before, I will show you that towards the end and explain how you can get in and get a valid assessment. But I did think it would be fun today to take a little brief mini self-assessment. So have a piece of paper out, and what you're going to do is after I go through a few of these, you're going to decide whether you are one or the other. So again, extroversion versus introversion are opposite ways to direct and receive energy. I call it like the Energizer Bunny. It's a way to recharge your batteries. So which way recharge your batteries better? Extroverted people prefer to be energized by interacting with other people. They're social, they're expressive, they prefer to communicate by talking. They're really drawn to the outside world. After so much time being alone, they may be picking up the phone and calling a friend or trying to reach out and find a way to be involved in something. They usually learn best by doing or discussing. They are ready to take initiative in work and relationships. They work out ideas by talking through them. You may have a friend, or you yourself may be the person that's just like, I just need to talk this out with somebody. They may be extroverted. And they usually have a broad amount of interest. On the opposite side, people who prefer introversion are drawn to the inner world. They focus in depth on just a few interests. They learn best by reflecting on things. This may be the person that says, you know what, let me think on that a little bit more before I answer you. They prefer to communicate in writing. They may text, email. They may prefer that more so than communicating over the phone or in person. They tend to be a little bit more private. They hold some things to themselves. They're not an open book like someone who may be extroverted. They take initiative selectively when the situation or issue is very important to them. They think before they speak, and this is different than people who prefer extroversion, because typically they will say things like, oh, stick my foot in my mouth. It's because they may speak before they think. and then they recharge their batteries with some alone time, which is different than people with extroversion. So just very quickly, think, given the choice, which one do you prefer, extroversion or introversion? Just remember that in each of the preferences, we do both of these given different circumstances, but we do have a preference for one over the other. So jot down E or I, whichever you prefer. The next category of opposites are opposite ways that we take in information, which is sensing or intuition. People who prefer sensing focus on what's real and actual. They want to be able to use their senses. They want to see it, taste it, touch it, smell it to better understand it. They observe and remember specifics. They're good detail-oriented people. They trust by experience. They build carefully and thoroughly through toward their conclusions. They like facts. They like things that are real and concrete. People who prefer intuition, they, I will say things like they have a sixth sense. They trust their gut. They follow their hunches and sometimes move a little bit more quickly to conclusions because they trust that so much. They don't have to see it, taste it, touch it to better understand it. They just have an innate, intuitive way about them. They do focus on patterns and meanings and data. They remember specifics when they can relate it to something else. They trust by inspiration. They are typically more theory-minded, and they want to clarify those ideas and theories before they put them into practice. They're usually more imaginative or verbally creative, sometimes a little bit more artistic-minded. So take a quick second and write down either S or N. There's two I's in the MBTI, intuition and introversion, so we have to go with the N for the second category. Again, remember that we do both of these, but we do not do them with equal trust, so we need to have a preference. So write down whether you prefer sensing or intuition. The next category is the opposite ways that we decide and come to conclusions. This would be either thinking or feeling. People who prefer thinking make decisions by taking a step back and getting an objective view. They like to analyze the situation. They will take the people out of the situation and think about things a little bit more clearly using logic. They use cause and effect reasoning. If I do this and make this decision, how does that ripple effect happen next? They solve with logic. They're reasonable. They strive for an objective standard of truth, and they're fair. They want everyone treated equally. For someone who is more of a feeling person, they may view someone who is a thinking person as tough-minded. People who prefer feeling, they step in and identify with those involved, sometimes getting a little bit overly involved to better understand the situation. They empathize. They put themselves in the other person's shoes and empathize with what they're going through to be able to better understand and make the decision. They're guided by their personal and social values, and they assess the impacts of their decisions on other people. People with the feeling preference will typically have a hard time saying a very small two-letter word, and that's no. They have a hard time because they want to include people and they want to make sure that they're not hurting someone's feelings. They are compassionate. They also are fair and want everyone treated as an individual. But someone who is more thinking-minded, they may be considered tender-hearted. Someone who is thinking may consider someone who is more feeling as tender-hearted. They really strive for understanding, harmony, and positive interactions with other people. So take just a moment and write down whether you feel that you are more thinking or feeling when you're making your decisions. Again, we have a preference for one or the other, and so just write down T or F. And then last but not least, the last category of opposites are opposite ways to approach the outside world. We are either more judging or perceiving. I tell folks that judging is not in the negative sense. It's just the word that gets chosen for the MBTI. People who prefer judging are typically more scheduled. They organize their lives. If they say that they are going to be at an appointment at 12:15 on a Tuesday, then they are going to be there, sometimes come hell or high water. And this can be really frustrating to them when life happens and they can't make that plan. They're more systematic and methodical. They make short-term and long-term plans, like to have things decided, and they really try to avoid last-minute stress. Someone who is more judging will get right to work on assignments that they've been given in school, or right to work on work tasks when they're given them, because they don't want it hanging out there waiting until the very end, because they don't like that last-minute stress. People who prefer perceiving are more spontaneous. They're flexible. If they needed to not show up at 12:15 on a Tuesday, then they may just say, I'll catch it next time. And it doesn't seem to bother them. They're more casual. They're open-ended. They adapt and change course when needed. They really find those last-minute pressures energizing. So they may be the person in a classroom that does wait a little bit longer to get started on a project because they like the pressure towards the very end. They do like to keep things open and are open to change. I always say that people who are perceiving won't kind of box themselves into plans, because they want to be able to have some options. They want to be open to change. So again, we use both judging and perceiving as part of our lifestyle, but we don't use them with equal comfort. Everyone has a preference. So given the choice, which one do you prefer, judging or perceiving? And you'll just write down either J or P. So again, that was a very quick, down and dirty version of the Myers-Briggs personality type indicator. When combined, your preferences actually indicate your personality type. So you could have a combination of about 16 different combinations of these 4 preferences categories, or the 8 preferences themselves. So you now have a 4-letter self-type preference for the Myers-Briggs, and it'll show up on this screen. There is no wrong or bad personality type. That was the whole reason that Isabel Myers and her mother, Catherine Briggs, developed the MBTI based on Carl Jung's theory, was that they saw that there was validity in each of the personality types of individuals. So there is no right or wrong personality type, but you can learn a whole lot more about yourself and how you interact with the world by knowing your personality. So it matters, because when we become aware of the differences, we can also acknowledge the value of the differences. And that's where it really comes into play with careers. If you think about it, in the career that you've chosen, or the pathway that you've chosen, you're going to be working in that field, 40 plus hours a week, and working with individuals. And you need to know and be aware of differences and value the differences in other people. It gives us the opportunity to practice some new behaviors as well, because if we know that we typically are more extroverted, maybe sometimes we do need to step into that introverted role and think things a little bit, or have some space outside of others to practice a new behavior. They also wanted us to seek out other people who are different from us and incorporate those different perspectives into our interactions. So that was really the framework of the Myers-Briggs. So I'm going to pause right there and see if there are any questions about the Myers-Briggs type indicator and the quick self-assessment that we just took. If you do have a question, you can unmute yourself, or you can type in the chat box. And if you don't, fine. If you think things through, you want to type something in the chat box, that's fine. I'll get right back to it. But I did want to share with you all about Type Focus. Type Focus is a program that's housing counseling and disability services, and it's free to any student at Caldwell Community College. It's really simple to access. If you log into your MyCCCTI, that's the one that sometimes is called the portal, and you log in the middle of the login screen, there is a Type Focus logo. It almost looks like it's supposed to be there and you're not supposed to click it, just like it's an icon. But you can actually click that icon and then you can set up a user account. When you click the icon inside of MyCCCTI, this is what the web page will look like. And then you can either log in or you can register. So you can see on this screen there is a green register button. That's actually what you would do the very first time that you log into Type Focus. As you can also see, I've got my email address in there and password saved. So I can click log in at any time and be able to access my personal results. So what I encourage students to do when they get into Type Focus is to take the self-assessments. So on the left of this PowerPoint slide, you can see a screenshot of my welcome page. Now this is just the left-hand side of the screen. It's got the steps that you would take to complete the assessment, and it says Welcome Tuesday because I'm logged in. What I encourage students to do is to take the self-assessments. There are 5 different assessments. Personality, of course, is one of them, which gives you valid MBTI results on your personality type. Then there are 4 others that I think are very valuable. It's your interest, success factors, values, and skills. Now this all creates some information for you which helps you look at different careers that match your personality, your interests, your success, and values and skills. So once you have completed the assessments, I encourage you to reach out to one of us in the Counseling Center, and that way we can help you explore your options. You can see in step 2 there that you can explore your options on your own, but your personality results will be locked until you contact one of us, but we're more than happy to unlock those and discuss them a little bit more. And then steps 3 are to create your career roadmap. So picking out some careers that are of interest to you. So some of you may be thinking, I already know what I'm going to do. I already know what career I'm going into, what program or major I'm planning on doing, and that's wonderful. But I always tell my personal story because I, too, went to the community college and I did a 2-year applied science associate's degree, and then I went to work. I didn't have an opportunity to do a program like this where I would have learned more about myself and what other options were out there for me. And so I thankfully had a mentor that helped guide me to some different options and encouraged me that I could go on and get a bachelor's degree and then after that a master's degree. But I think if I would have had a program like this and I would have seen those options and how they fit with who I am earlier, that I would have changed the trajectory of my education. So I always encourage people to just give it a shot. The other thing that's great is that you may have a career picked out or a pathway, and you take this assessment and it's like the number 1 on your list. You're like, yes, I've picked the right thing. And it's super confirming to know that you're going into something that is a good fit for you. Steps 4 through 6 are talking a little bit more about career readiness, and that's where we can get you connected with Career Connections and Sarah and Jimmy, who are on the line with us to help you with that job search and those next steps. So there is an easy way to schedule an appointment in Counseling and Disability Services, and that's by contacting our administrative assistant, Charity Tenon. Her email address is ctinnin@cccti.edu, and she would be more than happy to set you up an appointment with one of us. And these are our counselors. We all are housed on the Caldwell campus, but we are also in the process of hiring a couple more counselors, and one of those will be housed at the Watauga campus. So there you can see Shannon Brown. He's our Executive Director of Student Development and Success. Myself, Tuesday Sigmund, Director of Counseling and Disability Services, and then Jalen Corpening. She is our Counselor of Counseling and Advising. And there's our contact information. You can also find it on the website if you're interested in learning a little bit more. So I really appreciate you joining us today to learn a little bit more about the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, how it relates to personality and careers. If you have any questions, you can unmute yourself and ask me or type them in the chat box.